Marshall and Sagar here. Welcome back to The Realignment. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Sagar and I are excited to bring back previous Realignment guest, Scott Galloway. He has a new book out today. It's called Adrift, America in 100 Charts. We also spoke with Scott back in December 2020, so if you enjoy this episode, you definitely enjoy that old one as well. Quick few notes before we get into this episode. Number one, if you enjoy this content or any of our other work, you can go to realignment.supercast.com. Once again, that's realignment.supercast.com. There you could subscribe and support the show at a subscription rate of $5 a month, $50 a year, or $500 for a lifetime membership. Secondly, this is a book episode, so if you'd like to go to our bookshop.org storefront, which is linked in the show notes, you can purchase any of the books we feature or discuss on the show. We get a 10% commission, and it goes to support an independent bookseller, so it's definitely right up our alley on 15 different levels. Finally, the Substack is back in action this week, so if you'd like to get access to the written content we put out for the show, go check out the show notes there as well, too. Hope you all enjoyed this episode. We'll see you on Thursday. Scott Galloway, welcome back to The Realignment.
Thank you, Marshall. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you again.
Yeah, great to have you here. And I'm sure the folks of Breaking Points are also going to enjoy this as well. Let's just start at the most basic level. What does it mean for America to be adrift?
It's the questions you're going to get that are the hardest. I think that a lot of the things that ail us can be fixed. I don't think we're lost. But I think that it's going to take, we have very clear issues and that we've lost some of our mooring. I think our connection to each other, I think our appreciation for what it means to be American, I think a recognition that we need to reinvest back in each other in America has diminished. And as a result, we're adrift.
And a quick follow-up on that. Adrift suggests, to your point, unmoored. When was the last time do you think we were moored as a society?
That's a tough one. I'm not sure if I had to go to a specific time or unmooring, it would be in the early 70s, where up until that point, wages had kept pace with productivity. Every time productivity through innovation or a peace dividend or DARPA, or whatever it might be, or manufacturing, whatever, assembly line technology, our middle class, as buttressed by wages, shared proportionally in that productivity. And then something strange happened in the 70s. I don't know if it was shareholder activism. I don't know if it was this kind of Friedman, what I refer to as sociopathic economics, where we decided to just optimize everything for shareholder value. And wages just flatlined for 50 years. While productivity skyrocketed. And that trillions of dollars of surplus value in between wages and productivity has all accreted to what we'll loosely call the shareholder class, of which 90% of the benefit has gone to the top 1%. So the unmooring, if you will, if you were going to try and there's a lot of things, but I think if you were going to try and distill it down to one event, it would be somewhere in the 70s when we decided to optimize for shareholder value versus the middle class.
Scott, you're kind of known for your charts. You're reminding me of a WTF happened in 1971.com, which has some great charts
100%.
Exactly talking about this, the uncoupling exactly of productivity, wages, and more. What are some of the charts in your most recent work that you've been pointing to as the most important that underscore the point you're trying to make about being adrift?
Something I don't think so what we're talking about gets a lot of attention, and a lot of economists talk about the same thing. And I've been to the site you're talking about. There's a chart put up that's based on Pew Research of a teen survey and survey of young adults. When you're walking down the avenue that is America, 1 in 3 men under the age of 30 have not had sex in the last year. And you hear the word sex and it fires all these neurons. But what that means, in my view, is that sex is a key component or step to what is the elemental foundation of any society, and that's a relationship. And I worry that a lot of young men are not attaching to relationships. And I think young men especially need guardrails, and they need a girlfriend, a parent, a partner, a job that says, put on a clean shirt, Don't get high or drink during the week. Be kind. Learn how to read a room. Recognize that no one owes you a living and you have to work for things. And I think a lot of young men are adrift, for lack of a better term, and that young men are failing. In the next 5 years, for every one male graduate from college, there's going to be 2 female graduates. So double the number of female graduates, college graduates. 7 in 10 high school valedictorians are girls. Boys are twice as likely on a behavior-adjusted basis to be suspended. So there's a bias against boys. And I think the result is a lot of economically and emotionally unviable men. And while we don't like to talk about it on the left, women, their primary criteria, especially in a world of online dating, is a man's ability to signal economic viability. And when fewer and fewer men are economically viable, we have decreases in relationships, we have lower birth rates, and we have a cohort that is the most dangerous cohort in the world. And that is a young, broken, alone man. And we're just producing too many of them. So that chart really stood out to me, that so many men are not engaging in relationships.
We keep hearing this number, and also it's mentioned in the book, 30. So to your point, men under 30, Sagar and I are both 30. You graduated from Berkeley with your MBA in 1992 when we were born. That seems to me a age where I would love to be 28 to 30 in that year specifically, all this opportunity in front of you. If you were to graduate today into the current set of conditions, let's say you're our age, what would you be doing with your time considering these issues? Are you in tech? Are you podcasting? Are you writing? How are you thinking about this moment in comparison to that past one?
Well, I'll take the last part. I think my generation has absolutely implemented a set of deliberate policies. There's this delusion of complexity around the issues that ail us, and that these are big problems, structural issues, and all these forces that are outside of our control have all come together to basically take the wealth of people under the age of 40 and take it from 20% of our GDP or 19% of our GDP to 9%. That we accidentally fucked your generation. It was not accidental. It was purposeful. Take the 2 biggest tax deductions, mortgage interest and capital gains. Who owns a home and who owns stock? People my age. Who rents and gets their income from current income? People your age. What do you need to get ahead? You need education. What field has gone up 1,400% on an inflation-adjusted basis? Education. I mean, just who's about to get the biggest cost of living adjusted increase in history? Social Security recipients who happen to be old people. Who gets bailed out during these crises? Old people. It just goes on and on and on about everything we do is to affect a transfer of wealth from people your age to people of my age. So first off, there's just more headwinds in your face than there was in my generation. To be born in 1964, a white heterosexual male in California meant you got near free education from UCLA and Berkeley. My total tuition from UCLA undergrad and Berkeley grad was $7,000. In addition, it was accessible. The admissions rate at UCLA when I applied was 76%. Now it's 6%. So it's not only more expensive for people in your generation, it's less accessible because my generation has entered into this NIMBYist rejectionist bullshit complexion where once I have my degree, I like that it's hard for you to get a degree because that makes my degree more valuable. Once I have a house, I'm going to put in place all sorts of zoning restrictions that don't make it easy to build new housing because I want my house to go up in value. And once I have a company that's hugely successful, I'm going to spend a ton of money to try and make it impossible for new companies to emerge. So we have this deliberate transfer of wealth from your generation to my generation. So the first is we absolutely need to say, okay, this has happened. We decided it could happen. So we need to unhappen it and not throw up our arms and say, oh, we can't figure this out. In terms of where I would go, I think about this a lot. Advice to young people. One, I would get to a city. Just you want to have the winds at your back.
Yeah,
it's just much easier. I don't know if either of you surf, but occasionally I'll surf somewhere where there's an incredible offshore breeze and perfect waves, and I talk myself into believing I'm a good surfer. No, I'm not. You're a great surfer because of the perfect conditions, and then I surf in real waves, and I realize I don't know how to surf. You want to pick the right beaches. And there's just a few basics. You want to get to a city. 2/3 of economic value or increases in economic value are going to happen in 20 super cities over the next 20 or 30 years. Even with COVID, you'd rather be good in a city than great in a smaller city. You want to get certified. For all the criticism that people don't know any college, it's a defense mechanism to make them feel better about the fact that they're being rejected or can't afford it. It's still, the graduates in my class at Stern, the average salary is $212,000.
Wow.
That's the average, meaning someone if is only making 110 at a nonprofit, there's someone making 300, and these kids are 28, 29. So college, especially at elite universities, is still paying off. I would focus a lot, I mean, this sounds strange, but on mental and physical toughness. Try and work out 4 or 5 times a week. I think it makes you less prone to depression. It makes you feel better about yourself. It makes you more confident in the pursuit of mates. It gives you the endurance. When I worked at Morgan Stanley right out of UCLA, I wasn't as well educated as the rest, not because UCLA wasn't a great institution, but because I spent the majority of my 5 years smoking pot and watching Planet of the Apes. I just was not as skilled as my peers. So I decided every week, Tuesday morning, I'd go to work and I wouldn't leave till Wednesday night. I'd work through the night. I would work 36 hours straight. And I got a reputation as that crazy guy who rode crew at UCLA who used to come in every Tuesday morning and leave Wednesday night. And it sent a signal that I was there to play. And I could do it. I didn't have a wife. I didn't have dogs. I had nothing going on. And I was physically really strong. And I was mentally strong, mostly from playing sports. And I think I think young people want to figure out a way to lift heavy weights and run long distances in their mind and in the gym. I think physical and mental toughness, really pushing yourself while you're young, is incredibly powerful. And then I think trying to take a certain amount of your day to invest in relationships really efficiently. Quick text messages. I admire you. I was thinking about you. I thought what you did today in that meeting was really impressive. So education, getting to a city, physical and mental strength, trying to guess which category. I mean, anything near processing power or software is probably going to, anything around fintech. I think probably the greatest disruption or an interesting place to be would to try and position yourself at the intersection between technology and healthcare, the largest industry in America that I think is just so ripe for disruption. I would have said that about education, but I keep waiting for the disruption and it keeps not happening. But loosely speaking, some best practices around being physically and mentally tough, getting certified and getting to the right geography. And before you collect dogs and kids, get to a city, because once you collect those things, it's very hard to stay in a city. And also, and it sounds very boomerish, give up the notion of balance. You can have it all. You just can't have it all at once. Mm-hmm. And everybody knows somebody who makes a shit ton of money, has great relationships, is in good shape, has a food blog, and donates time at the SPCA. Assume you are not that person. I did nothing or pretty much nothing but work in my 20s and 30s. It cost me my hair, it cost me my marriage, and it was worth it. I have a lot of balance now. And the reason I have balance is because I have the economic freedom to have balance, because unfairly, your career trajectory at your age, at 30, is unfairly important. Because it's like a rocket. The soup to get out of the atmosphere, the amount of fuel you have to burn to get out of inner space, because it's so thick, is you have to burn so much fuel. And then once you get to a point where you have some money to invest, a reputation, contacts, some credibility, if you can go into space with that trajectory, I just get further faster on less fuel than you do right now.
Right.
But God, get out of that inner space, and there's just no getting around it. It's just a lot of work. It gets more competitive every day. I don't know anybody that wasn't smart enough to inherit wealth, or wasn't smart enough to inherit wealth, that is really successful, that hasn't had a 10 or 20 year stretch where they were really burning it from both ends.
Mm-hmm.
Quick follow-up on this. So Scott, you know this, I'm sure listeners know this, Stern is an incredible school. When I'm thinking about folks who are struggling with college right now, I'm thinking of a person who went to second or third tier directional state university, or even a private college and has just too much debt. during their 20s in search of something that wasn't really going to be there. What would your advice be to folks who are kind of trying to treat this moment as a reset point, considering maybe you got some student debt written off, all those different things?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. The transfer of wealth of $1.5 trillion from middle-class homes to universities in the form of student debt, some of it's still worth it. I mean, when I was going to school, I borrowed money to get through undergrad. I borrowed money to get through grad. It was just a no-brainer. It was just a good deal. And what universities have done is they've captured that surplus benefit. They've taken it back. And to borrow $100,000 to get a history degree from a tier 2 university, for the first time, it's not entirely obvious that that's going to work. And to shove paperwork in front of an 18-year-old man or woman with a big university logo behind that person and have them sign paperwork, there's just no getting around it. Some of it's predatory. In terms of an individual who is having some debt forgiven, I think the same thing applies. This is a chance to be, once you get certified, I mean, there's a few things. One, we're talking about, I'm very economically driven. I grew up with no money. I thought I did a decent assessment of America, and I said, economic security is really important to me. It's just paramount to me for a lot of reasons. And by the way, that's not the playbook for a lot of people. A lot of people have decided they don't want to live to work. They want to work to live. They're going to move to a lower cost region. They're going to live modestly and have nice lives. There's nothing wrong with that. My playbook was I wanted real economic. I wanted to pursue wealth. And the algebra of wealth is, I think, pretty straightforward. And that is a focus on a talent. Not what is your passion, but what is something you are good at naturally and you think you'll become great at, and invest the 10,000 hours in the requisite bullshit and grit or overcoming bullshit. The corporate world is totally unjust. Get used to it. Have the resilience to put up with it. Try and become outstanding at something. I don't care what it is. And then once you're outstanding at something, you'll start to make money from it. And then live like a stoic. Try and figure out how little money you can spend. My junior and senior in college, I didn't have any money. There was every summer I used to go on this thing where I would just eat top ramen and bananas and milk, and I would try and put on 10 pounds of muscle, and I would try and spend less than $70 a week. That was my budget outside of my rent. And it trained me, to kind of save a decent amount of money. From a very early age, I always saved a little bit of money. And you guys have seen this stuff. The power of compound interest,
of course,
and time is just massive. And then the other thing is, as soon as you start making some money, as soon as you start saving some money, just diversify. Just low-cost ETFs, diversification, because once you let time take over, it's just, I was you guys yesterday. I look at you and I think I'm them, because there's something in our brains, because our species typically, for most of the duration of our species on this planet, we didn't live past 35. So we can't imagine ourselves older than 35. So unless I see myself in the mirror and go, Jesus Christ, that dude's old, I talk to you guys and I think we're colleagues. I think we're the same age. And it goes so fast that if you can figure out a way at your age to save, find a good job and save $1,000, $2,000, maybe if you're killing it, $3,000 or more a month, in an instant when you're my age, even if you don't kill it, even if you don't sell your podcasting company, even if you don't join Salesforce and get a shit ton of options, you're still going to be financially secure. And financial security is just so important because kids in low-income households have higher standing blood pressure. The majority of divorces are filed by women, and it's usually economics involved. People think the number one source of divorce is infidelity. It's not. It's something related to a financial breakdown in the household. Usually the man loses his job, has an emotional breakdown, or his business goes out of business. So we don't talk about it because it feels crass. But I think being very focused on the algebra of how you get to economic security, and a key component of that is at your age, and I don't know your situations, but putting yourself in as many situations as possible and taking uncomfortable risks around finding a mate. My wife, I met at the Raleigh Hotel at the pool, and I walked in and I saw this woman, and she was with another woman and a guy, and it was the middle of the day. And I said, before I leave here, I'm going to go over to this strange woman sitting with another girl and a guy and introduce myself and try and get something going. And I've done that several times and immediately gotten vibe like, get the fuck away from me. And that's humiliating. That's humiliating. But occasionally, and even more often than not, because most people are kind, they'll start a conversation. And now my oldest boy's middle name is Raleigh because I took those uncomfortable risks. The most important decision, the most important thing in your life will be finding a great partner. Someone who loves you, someone who's kind, someone who you really want to have sex with, someone who is economically responsible. Everything is a little harder or a little easier with the wrong or the right partner. And so at your age, you want to be accepting invitations to dinner parties. You want to be expressing interest in people, even when you risk some level of humiliation or embarrassment, and giving yourself as many opportunities as possible such that you can find what is, again, the elemental foundation of any society, and that is a productive relationship with someone else. This
is great to hear because we're actually old compared to most of the people who listen to the podcast. So it helps even more. For everyone, half of our audience was not even born on 9/11. They were actually, which is crazy whenever we have to explain it to people. I think what I want to dig into, which is kind of interesting, is whenever I hear you talking, I'm hearing a combination of like Dave Ramsey, Jordan Peterson, a lot of other elements of like the quote unquote manosphere. And much of it codes right in today's politics. Mm-hmm. You have been able to do all of this while maintaining your, I don't know how exactly you would describe yourself, like socially left, like progressive leaning, but market oriented. Why do you think it's important to try and normalize this message across political spectrums?
Well, I've been called the progressive Jordan Peterson.
Cringe. Don't embrace that brand.
Yeah, please don't. Please don't.
Yeah. Look, I think a lot about masculinity and what it means to be a man. And by the way, I don't think masculinity is the domain of people who are born male. Sure. I think a lot of women demonstrate wonderful. I think of masculinity as it's an invented construct, but I like to define it. And the best definition I can come up with is acquiring the skills and strength such that you can protect and advocate for others. That's when I feel like a baller. If I have these skills to advocate for a child that isn't mine, if I can plant trees, the shade of which I will not sit under, that's when I feel like fucking Tarzan. That's when I feel like I mean something and I'm a man. And I think that's what men should be aspiring to. And I think that masculinity and toxicity have been inappropriately conflated because of some really terrible behavior. But I think it pays to be aggressive. I think it pays to be strong. I think and why do you do this? Why do you aggregate strength? Why do you aggregate wealth such that you can protect others? And I think that these are, on the far left, we've decided that masculinity is somehow a bad thing. No, it's not. It's a wonderful thing. And what I don't like about some of the manscaping is it feels like we're victims, and somehow it tends to feel like thinly veiled misogyny.
It is, yeah, right.
And that it's not your fault. No, if you're in your mother's basement vaping and you're prone to misogynistic content and don't believe in climate change, boss, it's you that's fucked up in the head. And I think men have to take, I think it's a good thing to start from a place of, I'm going to take economic responsibility for my household. And that sounds sexist. And guess what? Sometimes that means getting out of the way of your partner who's better at that whole money thing and being more supportive of your partner. So I like traditional, I like this notion that masculinity needs a comeback, but it needs to be kind of a kinder, gentler form of masculinity. And also to realize that it's not something that you only get to own if you're born a man. But I I consider myself center left. I try not to assign this stuff to any political spectrum because immediately people have a gag reflex if they're on the other side. The best compliment I get it a lot, is like, I can't figure out if you're liberal or conservative. I'm like, good. I don't, why on earth are we establishing an orthodoxy? And I talk about this and I have charts in the book, one of the just most terrible things that's happened in our society. I love photography, and there's been some great colorizations of World War II moments. There's this outstanding image that's been colorized of a landing craft at Normandy on Omaha Beach. And these young men, average age 26, on an inflation-adjusted basis, they were making $800, and they're all like 30 of them wading into the water. Like knowing what was waiting for them on the beach, where 2 or 3 of them would not leave the beach. And I would bet none of them knew who was a Republican or a Democrat. All they're like, my life depends on this guy and his depends on me. And the fact that now 54% of Democrats with children are worried about their kid marrying a Republican is just so tragic that we immediately decide a third of people in each party think members of the other party is their mortal enemy. America has never been stronger geopolitically. We're food independent. We're energy independent. The brightest people in the world want to come here. We have the greatest capital inflows. The U.S. dollar is still the reserve currency by a long shot. But we're eating ourselves from the inside out. And just this totally false notion or a lack of recognition that Americans' best allies will always be other Americans. Where did that go? So I think the connective tissue between us is just fraying. It's just so incredibly disappointing. And I'd like to think that patriotism is a renewed call for an appreciation of the blessings that it is, what it means to be American, is not a left or right issue. But some of this notion that masculinity, I hate this shit from some of these people. I won't even mention their names that are getting a big TikTok following. They refer to women as bitches and talk about manliness in the context of like having some sort of power over women. That's just fucked up in the head. That couldn't be less what it means to be a man.
So I want to hit my last one, and then Sagar will, of course, pick up the TikTok reference to close us out. But I just want to ask you a question about individualism. Mm-hmm. Your articulation of what a young, possibly angry young man should do in their mom's basement, taking responsibility. I embrace that. But something you also write about in all of your work is this shareholder capitalism idea of personal responsibility and individualism. Like, you know, you're going to drive ahead. And so you're not contradicting yourself, but can you just talk about the gray zone between those two different areas? Because I know a lot of manosphere people will say things like, well, you know what, Scott, like that guy in the basement, there used to be a job for him in a factory and that doesn't exist anymore. So can you really just balance out the individualism versus societal forces bit here?
There is a job for him. We're at full employment, and maybe watching Instagram and believing that they deserve a high-paying job or that they don't have the self-discipline to get Christ, flip on. If you have a smartphone, you can get a job. Just start making money, whatever it is. I don't care if you're, a barista. We've got to stop diminishing trades jobs. We need a massive investment in vocational trainings such that we can level up young people, especially young men. 50% of Germans have some sort of vocational certification. It's like 5% in the U.S. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure which part of my work you're talking about as it reflects individualism. What I try to speak more about is the importance of institutions. I'm an advocate. I would like to have, and it's easy for me to say because I've aged out of this, I would like to have some sort of national service. I'd like my suggestion was a Corona Corps during the epidemic where young people who have much lower fatality rates from the novel coronavirus enter into a Corona Corps that focused on caring and helping others who were sick. I like what Israel does. I like what some nations in Northern Europe do, where you have 1 to 2 years mandatory service. I know a lot of Israelis that met their spouses in the army. Oh. I think it creates the most patriotic Americans are those who have invested the most, specifically our veterans. They have invested the most in America and they're the most patriotic. I find this scary thing where the least patriotic people are tech billionaire men who have built a layer of innovation on top of massive investments from the middle class, whether it's GPS or DARPA or satellite technology from the Apollo missions or EV credits from the government. And then they start shit posting the government, saying, well, the government just needs to get out of the way of innovators. It's like, boss, should we get out of the way and no longer supply you with EV credits? Should we get out of the way of that $450 million loan we gave you early on, Tesla? Should we get out of the way of building charging stations all over the nation? I don't care if you're Google, Apple, Moderna. These things were all built on the back of enormous forward-leaning investments from the greatest organization in history, and that's the U.S. government. So I'm trying to lean more into institutions. I'm trying to have more people on my podcast from the government. I know so many people. Find me a tech billionaire, and I'm going to find you someone who's talented, but who spoils far outpace their talent. Find me someone in government, and I'll find someone whose compensation underindexes relative to their commitment and their talent. And I'm just fed up with it. I find it obnoxious that these guys. Peter Thiel wants to create a floating nation where he doesn't have to pay taxes. He's a fucking government contractor. Palantir gets 60% of its revenue. Elon Musk, SpaceX's biggest client is NASA, and yet they say these profane things about our government, and I just find the whole thing so upsetting. I think there's a virus in our society, especially among tech community. And also, I think it infected me, where we credit our character and our grit for all our success, and we blame the market and government for everything that's not working out. And I don't have any such illusion. I'm a product of big government and the irrational risks the government took on me in the form of public education. But I think institutions are really important. I think I'd like to see more funding for our government institutions, and also more respect, like the kind they have in Israel, for our government officials. Anyways, I think that young men in their basement need to attach to institutions. I don't care if it's church. I don't care if it's government. I don't care if it's a softball league. I don't care if it's a university. I don't care if it's working somewhere. But greatness is in the agency of others. Your age, find others, and don't find them online. I mean, use that as a vehicle. Get out, smell, touch, and feel people. Go out, talk to that person in front of you at a Starbucks line, ask him or her out for coffee, join a group, join groups, get involved. I think institutions matter, and I think we've had a fraying, and my colleague, I'll apologize for this word salad, my colleague at NYU Stern, Jonathan Haidt, says that successful societies have to have strong institutions that we all respect. And I think I just find it so disappointing that we don't have more respect for our institutions. Anyways,
I think I completely agree with that. Go ahead, Marshall.
Quick thing before you close us out, Sagar. I saw you tweeting, Scott, with Brendan Carr. Have him on the podcast. He's the FCC commissioner. Yeah. We had him on the show 2 years ago. Great guest. So I think that's the definition of a great government guest that you should bring on the podcast.
He's coming on.
That's great. Yeah. Huge
because of Twitter. I said, come on the pod. Actually, he said, can I come on the pod? And I said, absolutely.
He'll enjoy it. He's a good person to talk to. My last thing is on TikTok. You were at the fore, one of the front people who said we absolutely need to ban TikTok in terms of American competitiveness and more. That was a couple of years ago that we had that conversation. So last couple of years, the Biden administration apparently considering it right now. Have you? I know you maintain the case, but given the updated market dominance and more that we've seen from it, what are your thoughts?
So I love TikTok personally. I think it's genius. I'm addicted to it. If I got off this pod now, I could easily spend 2 hours on TikTok. I absolutely love it. The clip that's getting a ton of circulation is my clip on Bill Maher, where I said it should absolutely be banned. And I'm an attention whore, and I love saying provocative things that I know will get circulated on Twitter. A more nuanced, thoughtful view is that I think there's a lot of gray sunlight in between letting things go as they are and totally banning it. A ban of media feels uncomfortable, and I acknowledge that. I think a spin might make the most sense, where they say, all right, we're spinning it. And it's also going to be all data is going to be on U.S. servers. I know they're talking about that, but here's the issue. If you have sons, do either of you have kids?
No.
Okay, so I've never seen anything like this. When my 12-year-old, when my 12-year-old's on YouTube, he gets into it, or he's too into his phone. When he gets on TikTok, he lies down on his side, and it's literally like when the British put opium into China, and he just goes into this zone, and he is high. And I think if he had his way, we would leave him alone, and he'd go into his room and put on diapers so he could watch TikTok for 40 hours straight. And there's something about that algorithm, the genius of it, that it just, without you even having to decide, oh, I'm going to watch House of Dragons or I'm going to watch Euphoria, it just tells you, no, we know what you want. And it's just a never-ending streaming platform of content. And it's really addictive. Now, if you believe that there's no separation between the CCP and a Chinese company, which I believe, yes. They disappear a CEO. Can you imagine if the U.S. government got sick of what Bezos was saying about them and disappeared him for 4 weeks? That's what they did over there with Jack Ma. He disappeared and then he showed up and said, "Oh, I'm gonna start painting now and not say anything about the government." So I think they can do whatever they want. Two, if you recognize that Americans, youth under the age of 18 are spending more time on TikTok now than every streaming network combined, are we comfortable with the notion that the CCP has influence over media that more 18-year-olds are spending more time consuming than any other media, with maybe the exception of YouTube? And if I were the CCP and I had an vested interest in diminishing our global standing relative to the Chinese, I would absolutely put my thumb on the scales in an elegant and insidious way on content that reflected America in a bad light and raise a generation of youth that said, you know what, our elections are rigged. Capitalism doesn't work. Income inequality is so out of control. Systemic racism, I'm not going to acknowledge the progress we've made around in our society. America doesn't work. I think the CCP could absolutely raise or influence a generation of our future military leaders, politicians, elected individuals, media, that they wouldn't even know what's happened. It's like, I don't know, a great old movie, The Sting, with Robert Redford and Paul Newman. The key to a sting is the mark doesn't know they've been conned. I believe it's happening right now. I don't think we even know what's going on. And I think we're going to raise a generation of kids that just feel a little worse about America. That's what I would do if I were them. So I think this is fairly obvious logic. I think it would be incredibly easy for them to do it. So my viewpoint is we need to do something. We need to say, all right, spin it, make it, and I think they deserve economic prosperity for what they've built. I think the people at TikTok are good people. I think they would love a Chinese wall. The only thing between them and their Gulf Streams and their homes in the Hamptons is the threat of CCP intervention. Right. So they would love it. Unfortunately, they can't build that wall. The CCP gets to do whatever the heck it wants with the company's domain in China. They'll put Didi out of business. They put the entire tutoring business out of business because they decided it wasn't good for China. They play the long game. We in America always like to think we're smarter. The Chinese are pretty smart. They've brought 500 million people out of poverty in the last 50 years. We've actually seen our middle class decline. And one thing they decided early and often is social media, Twitter, Meta, Google. No, we're not going to have it here, but you should have it. You should have it. And one of those companies, the most ascendant in history, that it's got to 1 billion customers faster than any platform, we might have a few engineers that can put their thumb on the scale of that algorithm, what our young people see. So I absolutely think it's an issue to be addressed. And I've been accused of being xenophobic and, rejuvenating jingoism here. I get it. I understand people's concern, but I think this is a real threat.
Well, real quick, because that was a great clip, and I want to close this off from those outside critics. This doesn't inoculate Facebook and all of other tech companies in America from whatever things that they've done. All you're actually asking for is to make the relationship between TikTok and the United States much closer to the relationship between Facebook and the United States. Like that's the underlying thing here. I want to just jump off a bridge whenever folks just sort of say, but Scott, Facebook's bad too. And why aren't you talking about them? There's an entirely different legal relationship here. And I think people at this point are being purposefully, I used to be more sympathetic towards folks just saying like, oh, but I just don't understand the difference here. No, I think at this point it's just purposeful, purposely trying to misunderstand what folks like you were saying. So I just wanted to add that in there because I feel really strongly about it.
Yeah, thanks, Marshall. And it's frustrating for me. It's like, why aren't you saying these things about Facebook? I'm like, dude, have you met me? I've been yelling about. I've called Mark Zuckerberg the most dangerous person on the planet. Facebook is the ultimate espionage tool, and I believe the reason they have gotten away with so much. And I realize this sounds paranoid, but it doesn't mean I'm wrong. I believe after the senators get their moment on camera to berate Mark Zuckerberg in front of the press, they then go into a confidential Senate security hearing, and he says, "You still want our help finding Taliban leaders and killing them?" I mean, the Mossad, the NSA, the GRU couldn't have the wildest dreams invented Meta, Facebook, and Instagram. You don't think somehow we're going to find out along the lines that we found out the niece of one of these Taliban leaders was on Instagram, and that's how we GPS located this guy for a drone strike? I think that's the implicit deal we have with our platforms. And I like that. Does that let them off the hook for teen depression or for misinformation? 100% no. Should they be broken up? In my view, absolutely. Should one or more of these people, if we find out they knew about teen depression and ignored it, should they come up on criminal charges? I believe so, absolutely. But they're Americans, and they do have, just as TikTok has to answer to the CCP, but the CCP can be more efficient about it. I do think that American companies at the end of the day do, not Meta, I'm not sure, but I think most of them do feel a sense of patriotism. And we have, they're somewhat aligned with American interests. TikTok, not so much, but you're absolutely right. It doesn't let Facebook off the hook at all.
That's really well said. And we'll wrap it there, Scott. Be mindful of your time. Really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Guys, congratulations on your success. And I love that you're spreading good work and being great role models for other young people. Thanks for your good work.
Thank you, sir.
Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you learned something, like the show of mission, or want to access our subscriber-exclusive Q&A, bonus episodes, and more, go to realignment.supercast.com and subscribe to our $5 a month, $50 a year, or $500 for a lifetime membership rates. See you all next time.